Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Speaking with Confidence with Kat Matson, the show where I coach you, humble leaders, how to speak with authentic confidence, with true authentic confidence, so you can show up and contribute to the conversations that matter to you and therefore make an impact. Now, before I dive into today's episode about storytelling, instead of over-explaining, I want to let you know about a free event that I'm hosting this Friday. So if you're listening in real time, this Friday, the 27th of March. It's called my Storytelling Speakeasy. Now, if you haven't attended one of my speakeasies, they're pretty special. It's an online group workshop where I will share a little bit of content to help you frame up your thoughts, to teach you, in this case, how to tell better stories, and then we practice. Because one of the biggest challenges to speaking with greater confidence is the opportunity to practice, right? Because you don't want to practice with your colleagues because you're afraid of looking like a doofus. And so the speakeasy is a safe place where you can practice, in this case it'll be storytelling, and get coaching without the fear of looking like a doofus, without the fear of losing credibility, without the fear of having to acknowledge to your colleagues that perhaps you don't like speaking in public. So it's happening this Friday, the 27th of March at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, which is noon if you're in Sydney and Melbourne. The details are all in the link in my show notes. Yes, you need to register because it's an online thing. And no, the recording won't be made available if you can't make it. Because of the intimacy of practicing, I only send the recording to the people who can make it. So all the details in the show notes. I hope you can make it. Now, storytelling. How to stop explaining yourself and use storytelling instead. Look, I'm quite confident these days that I am undiagnosed neurodiverse. And I remember plenty of times in my public service career where I would over-explain. I would over-explain my ideas, my recommendations. I would go down all of the rabbit holes of all of the detail, and I would watch, in particular, my CEO's eyes just glaze over as he just couldn't receive all of the data that I was giving him, all of the reasons, all of my words. It was just like pouring water into an already full glass. Now, the reason I was over-explaining was because I was trying to convince him that I was right. I was trying to convince him that I knew what I was talking about. But how I was doing that was I was trying to convince him based on the data, based on the information. Whereas if I'd been using stories, I would have done a whole lot better. So a good example is one of the transformations I was trying to lead was something that we called, still do to some degree, open innovation. Now, open innovation serves two key purposes. One, it's the idea that rather than making your innovation processes private and secret, like, for example, a company like Apple might do, you actually open it up. So you've got more eyes on the problem, more eyes on what other people are doing, and so then you can iterate and create solutions faster. The key advantage of open innovation from a city context is that when you invite local businesses in, you get high engagement because local businesses really want to solve the problems that are hurting them and hurting where they live. But two, you then drive economic benefit because you can develop solutions that can then be purchased from local businesses. Now, big concepts, and this was 10 years ago, very big concepts, very new concepts, and I was trying to explain what this all looked like I just did then, but with more detail, with more data, and talking about other cities that had been doing it. Rather than using a story that said, this is what another city's done. This is how another city has used open innovation to create a solution to XYZ. Now, as I moved on in my career, and I proved myself in this regard, I was able to develop my own stories that I could then tell. And so now these days I'm actually contracted by other councils to help with their innovation processes because I can talk about the projects that we worked on. I can talk about the open innovation event that we hosted with 400 people, all solving the problems of sustainable construction practices, rough sleepers, and small business support. I'm able to talk about how we were able to use different design thinking methodologies at scale. I'm able to talk about how we developed some really cool ideas for solar-powered Christmas decorations on the Brisbane Christmas tree. If I had used stories, I would have stopped myself from over-explaining. So when it comes to the things that you currently over-explain, when it comes to the stuff that you get really passionate about, but you find yourself over-explaining because you're either trying to prove that you're right, you're trying to prove that you know, or you feel like you need to let your listener know all of the stuff that you've gone through to reach your conclusions in order for them to believe the same, what's a story that you can tell instead? Can you take a story from somebody else's experience? Can you create a fictitious story of this is what this could look like if we did it? Now, I'll post a link to some previous episodes where I talk about my brag bag stories. That's a good example of credibility stories. Chances are you have some credibility stories or some brag bag stories that will point to why you care about whatever it is that you're currently over-explaining. And when you use those stories, you'll find that you over-explain less and you can just tell the story, kind of like how I did at the beginning. So, as we wrap up this month on storytelling, I wanted to just provide some last little snippets, if you like, on my thoughts on storytelling. The first one is don't overthink it. Don't overthink your stories. And how you don't overthink that is just figure out the message that you are trying to land, figure out the point that you're trying to make, figure out the outcome that you're looking for, and then go searching through your own experiences of a story that will illustrate that. Then figure out which parts of the story are important for your listener. Most of the time, many of us who are neurodiverse, we will try to tell the story in chronological order with all of the details. Yeah, our listener doesn't need all of the details and they don't need the chronological order. In fact, sometimes they just need the guts of it. The other thing is let go of the need of your storytelling to be a literary masterpiece and instead just use it as an example. One of the things that I do is I'm entrepreneur in residence for Western Sydney University, and therefore every week I coach the founders on how to pitch their startups. And one of the things that they do is they will give us, when they start, they will give us the blow-by-blow reasons why they started their business. So if I was to give you an example of a psychological support startup, the founder will often talk about all of the things that they've gone through in their lives themselves, and then how they had so much trouble finding solutions, and that they'll go through, and then I spoke to this psychologist, and then I spoke to that specialist, and then I spoke to this psychologist, and then I had to wait another 9 months, and they'll go through all of the blow by blow. Whereas a story can simply be, I've had my own psychological and mental health challenges. And when I hit the wall, I found it incredibly difficult to find timely support. And the more I spoke to my friends and peers about this, it turns out that this was the same for them as well. And it occurs to me that there's a better solution. And so what I'm creating is XYZ. Figuring out what the important part of the story is to demonstrate your point is key to telling a good story. And that's actually one of the things that we'll be talking about more in the Speakeasy on Friday, because it's when you start telling your stories that I can help you find those important parts. It's very hard for me to sit here in the abstract and come up with stories that might be relevant. So, with that said, I was laughing because a story just popped in my head, but it doesn't really demonstrate the point that I want to make right now. So I'm just gonna let it fly. I'm just gonna let it go through my mind. But I do want to tell you the story of why I think it's important that you speak with greater confidence and impact, particularly in this current time. If you're listening to this around March, April 2026, the world's crazy. The world is crazy at the moment. The reason I do this work now was an accident. I was creating a business to protect myself from being wholly dependent on an employer, and I was sitting in an employment role that I wanted to leave, and I couldn't because I needed the money and I didn't have something else to go to. And so I'd started creating a new business that I could create as a side hustle. And I honestly thought that I was going to create a business coaching practice because that's my background, that's my expertise. I've always been in growing other people's businesses. But as I was developing the idea, I couldn't figure out how to do that, one, at scale, and two, in a way that I could do it as a side hustle. As I sat into the thinking of, well, what else do I do and what does the world need most right now? What's missing? Speaking with confidence, speaking with authenticity is what kind of popped into my head, because people had often been asking me, Kat, how do you do what it is that you do? And so my current business and this podcast was born. Now, 6 years later, I see just how important this work is, because, and again, this was informed by my public service experience, even when I was in a role of leadership, even though I was brought in for my content and domain expertise, there were plenty of times when I was dismissed outright, not because I was stupid, not because I was dumb, but because I couldn't articulate myself in a way that could be heard. And when I watched the decision-making conversations that happen at policy level, when I watched the decision-making conversations that happen at a corporate level, I realised that this is the issue. It's not that people aren't at the table, it's that they can't be heard at the table. Smart, intelligent, extraordinarily insightful people aren't being heard. And so I want more diverse voices contributing to the conversations that matter, which is more and more important every single day right now in a world of absolute crazy, out of control, crises left, right and centre, and we really need to come up with some new solutions. That story, that is the summary, that is the snippets of all of my process. Not the I was doing this and I was doing that and then I did this. It's the story that demonstrates why I do what I do. And so that's what I mean by identifying your real fact-based stories, your real life stories, and then using them to make your point rather than over-explaining, rather than going down all the rabbit holes. So with that, I hope you, one, have a greater insight into how to tell better stories, and two, perhaps as a newer listener, you might have a better understanding around why I think speaking with confidence is so freaking damn important these days. Hopefully you can make it to the storytelling speakeasy this Friday. And also, heads up that my new Communicate with Impact program will be opening very soon. It's formerly it was known as my Impactful Presenters program, but I've reshaped it to connect more with the people who just want to speak with greater impact in day-to-day conversations, not necessarily be a presenter. So that's coming soon. If you would like to know more information, either make sure you're on my mailing list. I'll pop the link in the show notes, or just ping me on Instagram. Again, the link to that is in my show notes. Here's to confidence. Here's to impact. And I really look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Catch you then.